What's up YouTube? In this video you are going to learn how to use ViewPager2 with adapters, using your application to swipe through different screens, and also using dot indicators, which are super useful when it comes to tutorials, to also show the user where he currently is throughout the tutorial, but also in general if you want to have multiple screens that the user can swipe through. So this will just be part one of the ViewPager2 series. In the next video you are going to learn even more about it. There you are going to learn how to swipe through horizontally, vertically, using a tab layout, and a lot more. So definitely hit the subscribe button if you don't want to miss out, and also hit the like button if you want to help us a little bit. So let's get started. Hey, and by the way, we also have an article that you can find on our blog that is going over everything that you will see in this video, with the code and also the resources. So you can just download them from there. Definitely check them out, and maybe you just want to read through it instead of just watching the video, or just use it as additional material. So check out the link in the description to get to the blog post. All right, so let's look at what we are going to build in this video. And you can see that we are going to create swipeable screens in Android with ViewPager2. So you can either swipe here, or you can just press this next key in order to swipe to the next selection. And then once you're finished, you will find this screen here, where you will see that you can swipe in the vertical direction, or also swipe in the horizontal direction in order to jump to the next category. So we have three categories. We have the T-shirts with double E, and then we have the hoodies, and then finally we have the sneakers here. And depending on how we swipe, we jump over to the other selections here. So I'm already at the bottom, which is why the swiping to the right doesn't work as well anymore, but you can really see how this could be useful to your application. And you can also click, of course, to these tabs, and you can then swipe from there. Okay, so let's build this. But before we do that, let's look at ViewPager2 a little bit. So let's look at examples of swipeable screens and cases where they are required in an application. One of the applications of swipeable screens is feature introduction. So it's popularly known as the onboarding screen, where you show a user what they can find in the application. Another example is when you want to display different sections belonging to a category on the same screen. We're going to build out these samples in this tutorial. So ViewPager2 is a better version of the traditional ViewPager widget, and it comes with more features, like now you can easily enable vertical scrolling by adding it to the XML file as an attribute. If you are already familiar with implementing a recycler view, then it comes even more easy for you to use ViewPager2 with views just like a recycler view, as you can now extend RecyclerView.Adapter. The FragmentStateAdapter is a new adapter class that makes it easier to swipe between fragments, because fragments are generally something you would use in MVVM, for example. And with the tab layout mediator, you can easily attach a tab layout to a ViewPager to show titles of each slide. So I'd say let's go into the project and build this from scratch. By the way, on our website, you can follow the instructions step by step and also get the code if you want to. So just check out the link in the description to get that. Okay, so let's start with an empty activity here, and let's call this one Fashion Gallery. I'm going to use API 21 and Kotlin as usual. Now the first thing that we will need to do is to set up view binding, because I'm going to use view binding in this project. I'm going to use best practices here. Therefore, we need to go all the way down here in our build.gradle app file, and we need to add the build features here like so. And the ones that I want to use is the view binding feature. So I'm going to set that to true. We need to add the dots indicator. So I'm going to add an implementation here, com tb1 normal dots indicator 4.2. At least that's going to be the version that I'm going to use. So now let's sync that. And then once that is synced, we will need a bunch of drawables. Okay, so you can use your own images. I'm just going to use the ones that we have prepared here. So all of those sneakers as well as hoodies and stuff. Okay, so just drag in some images. Just make sure that you have the names ready here. Now, inside of the values themes folder, I want to make sure that I'm not going to use the action bar. Therefore, I'm going to change that from dark action bar to no action bar. I'm going to do that in all files or both files in the bright as well as the dark version. All right, now in my main activities XML, so this one here, activity underscore main XML, I don't want to use this text view. Instead, I'm going to use a ViewPager. Okay, so ViewPager2 widget. And therefore, I'm going to use the following settings. So here, I'm going to give this the ID of ViewPager. It's going to image parent in terms of width. The height should be 400 density pixels, and it should have a little bit of a margin. And here you can see where it's from. It's from Android X ViewPager2.widget.ViewPager2. Okay, and then I will use dots indicators. So it's these little dots that you can find here at the bottom. They're pretty neat, and that's what the dependency was for that we just added, this tbo no more dots indicator. Okay, so let's add those. Therefore, I'm going to add this code here, as you see. So the constraints are important here. Of course, it's to the start of parent, to the end of parent. We have a little bit of margin towards the top. It is going to be to the bottom of the view pager. So basically, this is underneath the view pager that we have right here. And then the layout width and height are wrap content. We're going to use darker gray as the dots color. The corner radius is basically how much you want the dots to be circle. The dot size is the size of the dots. I'm going to use 16 here. Spacing will be 4 density pixels, so a little bit of distance, and then the width factor will be 2.5, as well as the selected dot color will be purple 500. So this is just a color that is defined here, which is this purple color. Okay, so you can play around with these values. I'm also going to set the progress mode so that we have this progress mode here where it shows you where you currently are at, where it swipes or makes it thicker. So you can just play around with those values to get different results. Then we need to make sure that we have this little button down there. So I'm going to use a material button for this, and I'm just going to give it the text of finish. So nothing too complex here. Just need to make sure that the constraints are set correctly. Set the margin towards the top so that you have a little bit of a distance there. So you see here, this is the view pager. Then we have the dots, and then we have the button. We're just going to say next, 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 and then we're going to override it at one point saying finish. Okay, so that's the UI, at least for the first screen. And next we are going to require adapters. So just like most widgets that display a lot of items, ViewPager needs an adapter to easily control how each item is displayed on the screen. There are two types of adapters that can be used with ViewPager2. One of them is going to be RecyclerView.Adapter. Just like a RecyclerView, you can use views with an item layout to build out your slides in ViewPager2. If you know how to use a RecyclerView, then this approach should be familiar to you. And then there's the FragmentStateAdapter. This adapter is built to work well with fragments. That's why you can easily integrate ViewPager with fragments, which we're going to see later. So let's first of all start with the RecyclerAdapter. And therefore, I'm going to need another layout here. I need to define how each individual item is going to look like. So let's create a new file here inside of the layout folder, of course. And I'm going to call this one intro_items. It should use constraint layouts. Everything else is fine. And now let's check out the code here. Basically, I want to have an image view at the top. So I'm going to use app_compat image view for that. And you can see that my constraint layout is lacking some dependencies here. So let me make sure that I have all namespaces added here correctly, like so. Okay, now the error disappears. Okay, so now we need to have the app_compat text view At least that's how I want to design this. So every single item should have an image as well as a text view. And then finally, I want to have another text view. So we have one that is for the title and the other one that is for the description. So the title, wrapping the content, having a little bit of margin, 18 SP for its size, being bold. It's going to be to the end of the icon IV, which is this one here, our app compat image view. And by the way, if this is too fast, you should definitely check out my Android masterclass video where I teach you everything about XML and stuff. So here we have this additional text view, and basically this is how each individual item is going to look like. Image, title, description. So this image is currently empty, but we are going to populate it later on. So you're learning something about Android app development in this video, and maybe you want to learn a lot more about it. Then you can check out one of my 2 courses. So if you are a beginner Android developer, then I would highly recommend to check out my Android Masterclass course. There you will learn to build Android apps from scratch and you become a real Android developer. Or maybe you want to become a better Android developer because you are one already and you want to become a real pro. Then I would recommend to check out the Jetpack Masterclass, because there you will learn how to use Jetpack, which is a suite of frameworks that will make sure that you are a senior app developer. All right, so I would really recommend to check out those courses if you want to step up your app development skills very quickly. You can find a link in the description below, which will send you to the course with a huge discount. All right, so thanks a lot for checking out those courses. This really helps us out and this enables us to create these videos. Either way, I wish you a nice journey to becoming a great app developer. And now let's get back to the video. Okay, so now let's go ahead and create a data class. And I'm not going to make this too complex. So let's just go ahead and create a new file here. A data class. Let's call this one intro. Okay, so this data class intro should have a photo, which will be an integer. So here, then it needs to have a title, which will be a string. And then we have the description, which will also be a string. But the description is going to be nullable because we don't need to define it if we don't have an intro. Okay, as it is with adapters, we of course need to create an adapter class itself as well. I'm going to call this one intro adapter, like so. And as adapters usually need data, we're going to, well, a list of data. We're going to call this one intro list, which will be a list of intros. Okay, so we need to pass a list of intros. We're going to later on create an object file which has all of the data, or fake data, but of course you could replace this data with whatever source you have. If you have that source from your AWS server, or if you have it from Firebase, or wherever the data comes from, you can just send it to the adapter and the adapter will understand what to do with it. Now, of course, our intro adapter should inherit from a RecyclerView class. Okay, so we need to make sure that it inherits from the adapter class. Now it needs to know which view holder it should use, and I'm going to call this one intro adapter dot intro view holder. So this is generally how I approach this. There is no intro view holder at this given point, but we're going to create one as an inner class in here. Okay, so let's go ahead and create this inner class called intro view holder, which will require a binding object because we're using view binding here. And by the way, if you want to learn more about view binding, check out my video on how to use recycler views with view binding, because we're not going to use find view by ID, neither are we going to use Kotlin extensions. We're going to use the best practices that Google wants us to use, and that is going to be view binding. So here I'm going to use intro items, and it was already given to me. So let's select this intro items binding because we activated view binding, right? So this intro view holder needs to inherit from RecyclerView.ViewHolder. Okay, and I'm going to bind or pass the binding root to it. That's generally the approach that you should take here. Okay, so let's define this inner class. What do we want to do there? Well, basically we just want to bind items in there. So let's create this function called bind item and pass the intro item to it. So each individual item should be handled by this intro view holder. So what is it that we want to do? Well, we're going to use this binding object that is given to us, this one here from the root. And we are going to use the description TV, meaning text view. We're going to get its text and we're going to populate it with the description. Then we need to get the title TV and we're going to populate its text property with the title from our intro. And then finally, we are going to use the icon. And this was an IV, so image view, not a TV, so not a text view. And we're going to set the image resource here. And the image resource should be the intro photo. Okay, so basically what is going to happen here? Because there's a lot going on here. Basically, we have this intro class, right? And it's going to be the format that our introduction has. Okay, so it has a couple of data. So we're going to use this format where we get a photo, we get a title, and we get the description. And what we want to do is we want to assign it to each individual introduction item. So we want to add an image as well as a title, as well as a description to it. And as we want to use ViewPager and we want to be able to scroll through it, so this is basically like a list that we have here that we want to scroll through. So it's like a recycler view, right? That's why we need to have an adapter. Okay, and we're setting up this adapter. We call it intro adapter. And as it is with adapters, so if you are not aware of what adapters are, definitely check out my video on recycler views. You will need to understand how recycler views work for this to even make sense, I believe. So we need to have an adapter, and this adapter is using view binding in order to bind whatever we get from here, the intro for the individual item that we're currently looking at, for the description, and when we assign it to the intro item's description. Then what we get as the title, we assign it to the title, and so forth. This on our view holder, and you see the intro view holder is fine now. Now our intro adapter isn't looking very happy, and that's because his members are missing. So he's missing all of his buddies. So let's implement those members. And I'm going to implement all three of them. You can use the shift key and then just mark all of them and then click OK, and it will auto-define those for you. So what should happen once our view holder is created? So once this onCreateViewHolder method is called, because it's an override function, right? It will be called by the system and not by us. So once this adapter is coming into action, this onCreateViewHolder will be called for each item. And here I want to return my intro view holder here. It's this one here. And now this inner class is actually being used. So what else would I want to do there? Well, I want to make sure that I pass to this intro view holder object, I pass the intro items binding. And how that works is basically you need to inflate your view holder, and you inflate it by passing the layout inflator to it. So I'm going to use layout inflator.from, and here you need to pass the context. And I'm just going to say, get the context from the parent, because our adapter itself doesn't have a context. It uses the context of the parent, which means the main activity in which it's going to live. Okay, so we're passing that, and then you can add more parameters here. For example, you can say that let me see what's the correct name here. The view group will be the parent, and the Boolean, which will be the additional flag that you need to pass, which is attached to parent, we're going to set that to false. Okay, and that's going to be basically it. So that's what the onCreateViewHolder is going to do. And this is complicated when you look at it the first time, right? But generally it's always structured like this. So this is generally how you do it, and you might think, holy smokes, what is happening here? I don't get it. Well, no worries. You just need to structure it this way. Okay, and the next time you're going to work with this, the only things you would probably need to change, let's say you have more details that you want to display, would be which items you're going to bind. So if you have not the description, but instead you have, I don't know, an additional number or a date that you want to display, or you have the amount of likes or whatever to display, you would use this here. And of course, you would change the format of your data class accordingly. Okay, now let's go back to the onBind view holder. So how should every single view holder bind the data? Well, the cool thing is we are using the holder, which is our intro view holder, which is possible because we passed it here to our, well, we said that our adapter should use it. And it's this class that we created here. So basically we can now use this bind item function, and that should do the trick. So let's just say bind item. And now there is something else that we get from the onBind view holder. We get the position. So we know which item that we are currently looking at in our list. So we have a list of 3 items in this particular example, right? We have this t-shirt, we have the sneakers, and then we have the hoodie, right? And this t-shirt has the ID, so the position here, of 0. This sneakers image, or the sneakers entry, has the ID of 1, or the position of 1, and the hoodie has the position of 2. So basically we're just saying, get me the intro list at the position that you are currently at. So the entry of the intro list at the position that you're currently at. Okay, so this intro list, we're going to create it in a second. I think it makes sense to create that next. And then you will understand how everything is connected. So here in the get item count, we need to just return the amount of items we have in our intro list. So in our case, it's just 3, right? But we want to make sure that this is going to be easily adjustable because we have dummy data and we have 3 entries, but who knows? Our data that we get from the internet, it could have an unlimited amount of data. And unlimited, I mean like thousands upon thousands of entries. And that's the beauty here. It would take care of that for us. So now let's actually create the data source. And therefore, I'm going to create a simple object, because I don't want to use APIs here. I will not work with extra entries from a JSON class or whatever. So instead, let me create an object here. All right. So this object is going to be the page lists object. So this object is going to just be containing a list of intros. So val intro slides, and it's going to be a list of, and here I'm going to just enter the individual items. So I'm just going to copy it in here because I believe it would otherwise be too boring to look at me go. All right, so here, this will be my page list. Let me go over it real quick. So here we have the t-shirts. This will be the title. We're going to use this image here. You can see it here on the left-hand side, right? This t-shirt, you can jump on it by clicking the control key and clicking on it, or holding control key and clicking on it. Then we have the sneak. You can do the same thing here. This will be the sneakers and the hoodie. So you can click on the hoodie and you will get that. Okay, so you see that we have a little bit of a description. This \n, by the way, is a line break. So if you don't want this to be a super long text that will look weird on your phone, you create a line break manually by using \n. So the backslash here is an escape character, and n is just saying new line. So what this will do is it will create a new line for your description. You can see that here, customized \n hoodies in store. So this is just something that we decided to do this way, and you could of course leave that out. It would look differently then. Okay, so now let's connect the adapter to the ViewPager in our main activity, because we set up the adapter, we have the data source, we say how the data should be structured, so how each individual data item should be, so what it should have in terms of properties. But now in our main activity, we don't know anything about that. And especially we're using view binding, and what we're doing here is no view binding. So we need to make sure that we are in fact using view binding in our main activity. And in order to do that, we need to create a variable called binding. Well, you can call it however you want. I'm going to call this one binding, and it will be using my activity main binding. And I'm going to make this a nullable because I want to set it to null at the beginning. Okay, and now the next part would be, and by the way, we're creating this outside because we want to be able to use it in different methods. So we're creating it outside of any method. So that's the idea of the scope that we're using here. Now let's create the view pager. So here, private var view pager. This will be our ViewPager2 object, and it will be of type ViewPager2. Now let's make this a nullable as well, because we're going to assign it later on. Okay, so now that we have the view binding as well as the view pager, let's go ahead and set up the binding inside of our onCreate. And usually, as you see, we would set the content view based on our layout activity main, but as we are using view binding, we can just assign the binding object here, activity main, and you would expect that you would use the activity main binding dot bind here, but in fact you need to use the inflate, because you need to inflate your layout basically, and here you are going to use the layout inflator for that. And now you can use the set content view. So basically before that, if you look at it, so we had set this content view like this, but now instead we're going to use the set content view with our binding. So here we're going to say binding dot root, and we need to add this question mark because, well, our binding object is of activity main binding optional. There's this question mark here. Okay, so we're going to say get me the root item. What is the root item? Well, you can hold the key control and then press on this root, and you will see that it's this constraint layout. Okay, so basically what it says is it will inflate this XML file, which just means in proper English terms, it will display the constraint layout on your app's screen or on your phone screen. So that's the idea. All right, so it's just fancy speak, you know, like just a different way of doing it. Way more complicated, but well, Google thinks it's greater this way, so let's just do it. And next we need to set up our view pager, because we have prepared it here, right? But it's null, so it's not going to do anything. So what we will do here, therefore, is we're going to create a new function, which I'm going to call setup view pager, and I'm going to pass the activity main binding object binding here. Okay, we're using view binding, and that's generally how it's done with the setup view pager. So we need to set up this view pager. I'm just going to put it into an extra function here, and I need to get the adapter, and the adapter is going to be our intro adapter, right? The one that we set up for like 10 minutes or so, or even longer. And we need to pass the list in here, and I'm going to use the page lists intro slides. Okay, so what the heck is this page lists intro slides? Well, it's this object that we created, and because we just created it as an object, it's something that we can directly access. So we didn't need to create an object of it inside of our main activity. It just exists in this same namespace here in com example fashion gallery. It's in all the same namespace, basically in the same folder, right? So now we can access its intro slides, and this is just going to be this list, the list of the different items that we have. So here you could add more and more items manually. I would definitely recommend you to check this out, and yeah, that would allow you to test this app a little more. Okay, so now that we have the adapter, we can go ahead and set up our view pager. So ViewPager2 needs to have an adapter. So we are just going to say ViewPager2 binding dot ViewPager, and this ViewPager needs the adapter, as I said. So let's go ahead and use ViewPager2, which is now nullable adapter, to be the adapter, like so. Okay, so first we need to initialize the view pager, and then we can use this view pager object in order to assign the adapter. And where does the adapter come from? Well, it is our intro adapter that we just created. Now we can go ahead and use this view pager nullable or optional, or however you want to call it. And here we need to register, and let me use the correct term here. So register on page change callback. Okay, so we register an on page change callback, and we need to pass a callback that will work with it. But we don't have one yet. So let's quickly set one up. And we're going to do that up here. All right, so it's going to be a global variable that we're going to set up here, private val paper or pager, not paper, pager2 callback, which will be an object of ViewPager2 dot on page change. And I hope I wrote this correctly. It doesn't seem like it. So if it doesn't happen, just go ahead and use object dot, or colon actually, not dot, haha, there we are. So here, ViewPager2 dot on page change callback. So what the heck is this on page change callback thingy? So this on page change callback will be automatically called. It's a callback, right? It's going to call back, so to speak, whenever this page is changing. So on the change of the page, meaning when this other page is coming into view, then we need to do something. So it's going to call back, and then it's going to execute the code that we define here. So here we can now say what we want to do. So I will use a method called onPageSelected, and it's an override function. So it means that this is going to be a function that is internally being called once the page is selected, and the page that is at a certain position. So what is this position? Well, it's going to be the same position that we had in our onBind view holder. So once again, this one would be position 0. This would be position 1, position 2. Okay, so after it's calling its super function, we're happy with that. The constructor function, we're good. So now we can just check if the position is going to be equal to the page lists intro slide here, intro, of course I need to write it correctly, intro slides size -1. Meaning once it's almost done, let's change the text of our button. So here we're going to use binding dot controller button dot text, and we're going to set it to finish. Because if you look at the application, we can press next, next, and once it is at its last point, it changes to finish. So once it is at the last position, so to speak. So that's how you get to find out what is the last position. You just say, okay, give me the amount of items, so the size inside of this list, and then just use -1 because we're looking at the position, and positions start collecting or counting at 0, but lists basically have, well, if there are 3 entries, a list has the length of 3 or the size of 3, but the position 3 would cause an error. So that's why you need to make sure that you use 1, because the position 3 doesn't exist, as there are only 3 entries, and the entries are at 0, 1, and 2. Okay, so if you were to use 3, you would get a crash. You can try it out. You will love it. So that's if we are at the final position. Otherwise, let's set this button to next. So here, next. And also let's increase the number in the position. So if you look at it, once we click on this button, it increases the position. Basically, it jumps to the next slide. Okay, so if you want to achieve the same functionality, you just go ahead and use binding dot controller button dot, and here also this is a nullable again, set on click listener. And I'm going to use the one with the curly brackets because then I can directly implement what should happen. And what is it that I want to happen? Well, I just want to use the view pager because it's a nullable. I need to add the question mark, and I need to increment the current item. So I'm just going to say use the current position +1. And that's it. Now we can use this pager2 callback to pass to the register on page change callback because, well, it required a page callback, a pager callback to be precise, which is exactly what we now pass to it. So that will be happy, which is good. If the code's happy, we're happy. Now we can bind one more thing because this video is quite long already, so I'm going to definitely split that into 2 parts. Otherwise, it's a 1.5 hour video. So you can see we have these dots here, right? And they're pretty cool. I love them. But we haven't bound them yet. we need to bind them / we need to connect them with the ViewPager's position. And therefore, I'm going to use binding dots indicator with set ViewPager, and here, come on, help me out here, set ViewPager2, okay? And we're going to connect it with our ViewPager2, but now we need to force unwrap it because a nullable just doesn't work here. So we're going to use the double exclamation mark because the ViewPager is a nullable, right? But at this point, we know that it's not going to be empty, even though, of course, you could go ahead and use an if clause here and check if ViewPager is not empty and then do this. But I'm just optimistic that it was going to work this way. All right, and now we can go ahead and make sure that our onDestroy method is going to be implemented because you don't want to run into memory leaks in your application, right? So we need to override the onDestroy method and unregister the callback to avoid that memory leak when no longer in use. So you can just go ahead and set your ViewPager2 with unregister on page change callback with our pager2 callback. So the same thing that we here registered, we need to unregister onDestroy, which will be called once our application is going to be shut down. Okay, that's when the onDestroy method will be automatically called. We don't need to call that manually. Now, if you were careful, you would recognize that the setup ViewPager is grayed out. So this method's never called. And where would be a good point to call it? Well, I would say in the onCreate method. And now we just need to pass in the binding, and the beauty is we have the binding available here. So let's force it in here. And therefore we need to add the exclamation marks because binding is nullable and it can't be null, but we already initialized it just here. So that should be fine. So now a lot of stuff happened, right? We have already 4 classes, and this is really just to get this page here to work. But the cool thing is now you can go ahead and use this as your basis and just replace individual aspects of it. You can replace the structure that you have here, adjust your UI for your intro items, then, well, probably just make some minor changes to your bind item method, and then you're good to go. So of course your data source should be changed then as well. But if you change those 4 things, everything else should be pretty much the same and it will just work. Okay, so I would recommend that you play around with it and test this, then you will see that it actually works. So before I speak big words, let me actually try if it works even with my build, because we're not even there at this cool part here, right? But let's just wait for it to load. Okay, so I'm happy with it. It worked. Let me show you. So we have t-shirts. Let's click next. We have sneakers. Let's click next. And you see the button change to finish. And also always this dots indicator is changing as well, which is beautiful. And we have the hoodie. Okay, so now let me click finish, and of course nothing happens. And that's, I would say, something that we will implement in the next video. So now just to show you real quick how easy it would be to change the structure that you have here. So let's say we were to go and create another intro entry, and therefore I need to add a comma here. So here I have this new intro entry. Now let me check out which image I want to use in the drawables. So of course it's not going to be a new style or new thingy. Let me use T Africa, okay? So here I'm going to use T Africa as the image. I'm going to use T Africa, and this is just going to be another beautiful African t-shirt. Well, let's call it t-shirt, like so. Okay, let's test it again, and now let's see how this is impacting our data that we see here. So it already changed, as you see. So we have t-shirts, we have sneakers, we have hoodie, and then we have our T Africa. So beautiful African continent, including Madagascar here. So that's brilliant. And you can see we can swipe, we can click this next button, and it changes finish or to finish at the very last point. Okay, so it doesn't change to finish at 3, but actually at the last point. So our application is very easily adjustable now. If you were to go and now change your intro items, add another entry here at the bottom, then go ahead and add it here, add it into the adapter here at the bottom, and that should be, yeah, that should be pretty much it. And then make sure that you have it as the data itself, and you're good, golden. So I hope you enjoyed this video and this is going to be useful to you, but this is of course just part 1. So be prepared, I'm going to upload part 2 very soon. All right, and that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, then please hit that like button and the subscribe button, and also check out our Android masterclass. We are updating it to Android 12 now, so definitely check it out. And also don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter. You can find the link in the description below.